Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War news update, second part thereof for the 16th of December 2023. I'm back from being out, so sorry this video is a little bit late. My 13-year-old boy, one of my twins, had a football match, a cup game, and my goodness, the parents of the opposition were, I mean, there was almost some fights going on the sideline. I've not seen that yet with my boy playing, but yeah, it wasn't great. You have these respect representatives from each side. They wear a bib to show that they are the person you go to if you've got an issue with the opposition parents, if they're being a little bit outlined or something like that, because football is a bit like that in the UK, unfortunately. And their representative, their respect rep, was on the pitch berating our children, like our players, and then going mad at the ref. You're like, there's a deep irony there, isn't there? There's a lack of respect representative. Anyway, my boy won, so that's all okay through to the next round, but goodness me, that was pretty horrific. Anyway, the EU is preparing a tranche of you don't need to know that, a tranche of 1.5 billion euros for Ukraine, quote, in the coming days. This is the last tranche of the program this year, according to Ursula von der Leyen. This will help finance costs in early 2024, creating a small but important bridge. I presume that's to assist with governance of the country as opposed to military aid assistance. Lithuania today has delivered several million rounds, that will be small arms ammunition, I assume, of ammunition, and several thousand RPGs to Ukraine. For 2024 to 2026, Lithuania is planning a long-term military support package for Ukraine worth another 200 million euros. Now, this is, again, an example of long-term aid that messages to Putin clearly that, hey, you know, you can't make us tire out, because we are committing ourselves contractually to help Ukraine on this long-term basis. And several countries have done that now, and including the EU as well, has put things in place on a long-term basis. I think it's hugely important messaging that. The Netherlands will soon deliver a new aid package to Ukraine, according to the Ministry of Defense. It will include 11 APCs, so these are YPR 765s, upgraded versions of the old M113 American APC, 15 T-72 tanks, 24 small boats and inflatables, and 14 mechanized bridges. So awesome stuff from the Dutch there. Defense Ministry of Ukraine is interested in direct agreements with British arms manufacturers and is ready to sign long-term contracts. This was stated by the head of Ministry of Defense, Rustem Umerov. According to him, the goal of the ministry for the next year is to localize the production of weapons in the territory of Ukraine. So we know that British aerospace engineering, so BAE Systems, is wanting to get involved in production inside Ukraine, rather like Rheinmetall. I was talking the other day with German aid to Ukraine. Go and watch that interview. It's a really fascinating one from 2 days ago. I was talking to him about how Rheinmetall played such a crucial role, and BAE Systems are kind of looking at them going, oh, we want a piece of that. And so you are seeing, you know, entities like BAE Systems, and no doubt American military industrial complex entities, getting involved in Ukraine to help Ukraine, obviously, to make a pretty penny out of that as well, part of their sort of business model. But Ukraine need all the help they can get from both private defense entities and indeed nation states. David D here talks about another 10 to 20 BOV-206s. So these are the ones that the UK had promised in that Maritime Coalition announcement the other day. David D just says, hint, hint, now about 200 plus. So they've got a big bunch of these, right? And we've only seen a couple of them on or near the front lines. A couple of them, well, I've seen one in the Krinky area on the other side of the river, as in on the right bank of the river as it comes down towards the coast, which is the Kherson side, the Ukrainian side. I wonder, I mean, they've got enough of these now, and they are amphibious, whether this could indicate some intentions for the Ukrainians going forward. I think that's what he's trying to say there. Germany will supply Ukraine with 68,000 additional 155mm shells to protect against Russia. The Budget Committee of the German Bundestag has approved a framework agreement on the production of artillery shells. Andrew Perpetua on his live stream last night was talking yet again about how the military industrial capacity for the creation of the manufacture of artillery ammunition within Europe, he thinks, will outstrip Russian capacity, although it might not right now. He says that the potential for Europe is fairly immense, and once these industrial entities ramp up their production, once they kick into gear, you will quite probably get a very consistent large amount of ammunition provision for Ukraine. And Andrew was talking about how they shouldn't have had a counteroffensive this year. They should have basically been on the defensive, got all the ducks in a row, got all the ammunition they needed for a massive push, trained up as many troops as they could, just trick the Russians in a defensive posture, all the while preparing for a truly decent attack. And he said that the counter-offensive was ill thought out and the timing just wasn't correct. And they were indeed still waiting for equipment to come from Western allies and whatnot. So, yeah, I think there's a good rationale behind what he was saying there. Nonetheless, going forward, I think things are looking much more positive for Ukraine. The question is, are Russia able to ramp up their provisional procurement of weaponry and ammunition at the same time and to the same levels? So on that kind of note, Europe needs to prepare for new military threats, as according to the German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius. He believes that the defense industry of Europe needs time to build up its capacities. This is approximately 5 to 8 years. The German minister added that Putin is increasing the production of weapons in the Russian Federation. At the same time, his threats against the Baltic states, Georgia and Moldova, should be taken very seriously. This is Boris Pistorius saying, wake up Europe. We need to be really strategizing going forward. We need to have a military strategy in place that takes into account what Russia are doing now, where they're going to be in terms of production. And we need to be getting onto a kind of war footing in order to not just provide for Ukraine, but provide for the security of the EU and Europe going forward. Really important stuff. Anyway, here, French aid to Ukraine. Another Twitter handle says 25 kilometers from the front in the Donbass, Jan Lachien, the commander of the 56th Motorized Infantry Brigade, paints a gloomy picture of the situation. He talks about the vulnerability of the Caesar because of its size, and it is a big bit of kit, the Caesar, rather like the Bogdana, although the Bogdana is half as expensive, and that's the indigenously constructed version. But the Caesar can quickly become a target for Russian drones. Quote, I use it very little because it's very vulnerable and poorly adapted to the realities of war. If I take it out into the open to shoot, it becomes a target of counter-battery fires after 3 or 4 minutes. I don't have time to evacuate him out of the danger zone. Whereas with the M777, I can fire 300 shells a day on average. With the Caesar, if I can get 5, that's good. The M777 is easy to conceal, and I can install a metal casing around it to protect it from the Lancet. That's really fascinating that, according to Oryx, 4 Caesars have been destroyed and 2 damaged. So this is one of the, although it can shoot and scoot, it is a lot bigger. And he gives a link there. Hiding the Caesar leads to degrading its satellite link, which becomes impossible to guide fire without. It would be necessary to either guide the shot in manual mode or for the satellite antenna to be detachable. So yeah, a bit of a criticism of the Caesar there. Although it's very able, it has its downsides as well, and it can be very able in perfect conditions at firing and doing counter-battery fire and whatever. But if you can't really use it because it's completely vulnerable to lancets, but due to its size, then and the inability to protect it, then it's not as useful as one might hope. Right, Lithuanian MOD announced that the first Leopard 2 tanks repaired in Lithuania are gearing up for their journey to Ukraine. Having arrived from the front lines, these tanks are now ready to make an impactful return. The one thing that the Ukrainians do have is a military-industrial network behind them, Germany, Poland, Lithuania, and repair centers now springing up within Ukraine that enable them to, and also hopefully more engineering vehicles than the Russians, that enable them to recover vehicles once they are damaged. And hopefully the Ukrainians have a higher percentage chance of, turning a damaged piece of equipment into a functioning piece of equipment. Talking about equipment in general, and this is a very interesting article from RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, the UK military think tank, said called In Plain Sight, Operations of a Russian Microelectronics Dynasty. An exclusive investigation conducted by RUSI in partnership with Dutch current affairs programme Nieuwsuur. No one in their right minds would put two U's next to each other. It's just an obscenity. And ARD Monitor reveals how one of Russia's leading microelectronic distributors, Compal JSC, has imported massive volumes of Western microelectronics through Germany and Hong Kong since February 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Almost overnight, countries with little history of microelectronics trade became hubs for Russia's technology flows. For example, in 2022, Armenia's microelectronics imports from the US and EU increased by over 500% and 200%, respectively, with most of these later re-exported to Russia. Similarly, Kazakhstan's microelectronic exports to Russia increased from around $250,000 in 2021 to over $18 million in 2022. In other words, Russia seemed to be fairly able to get around all the loopholes or get around the sanctions that have been imposed on them. I mean, this is a really great investigative piece from RUSI. We are going to just dip into a little bit of the article further down. Pretty much actually the conclusion. So like many of the companies that have been, and they look at three particular companies, like many of the companies that have continued to import microelectronics, components and technology into Russia following the 2022 invasion, Compal, so that's one of the companies, appears to have been forced to reroute trade flows through jurisdictions like Hong Kong. However, the movement of millions of dollars worth of components through Europe, even after the invasion, unfortunately highlights the ease with which some Russian companies have continued to procure technologies that could be used by the country's military-industrial complex. As Russia faces the prospect of a protracted conflict in Ukraine, the Kremlin is increasingly gearing up its economy for war. The Russian finance minister left little room for interpretation about Moscow's priorities when he said in October 2023 that, quote, the main emphasis is on ensuring Russia's victory. The army, defense capability, armed forces, fighters, everything needed for the front, everything needed for victory is in the budget. And of course, if Russia's doing that, and yes, Ukraine are doing that, but from a much more precarious position than Russia, and without the might of having all of those hydrocarbons and the funding that allows, then Ukraine are relying on allies. But the allies aren't saying that. So, like Rishi Sunak in the British Parliament hasn't stood up and said the main emphasis is on ensuring Ukraine's victory. The army, defense capability, armed forces, fighters, everything needed for the front, everything needed for victory is in the budget, is in the UK budget. Of course, he hasn't said that. And so what that means is that Russia really do have an advantage unless we do get, as allies, onto some kind of quasi-war footing. Now, we are ramping up production in the military-industrial complexes around the world, but we need to be really thinking this is much more of a threat to our existences than I think has been announced. And we'll get onto this a little bit in the geopolitical section, because there's some really challenging rhetoric coming out of certain areas of global politics. Hence, it finishes with Russia diverting all possible financial and technical resources to support its war of aggression. Ukraine's partners should ensure that Western technology and microelectronics are not in Russia's arsenal. And it's such a massive challenge. Indeed, in Finland, the hidden export of 3,500 drones to the Russian Federation was discovered, according to Finnish customs. So Finland, a massive supporter of Ukraine. But of course, there are people in Finland, as there are in every single country in the world, that are like, yeah, but I can literally make myself hundreds of thousands of dollars off the back of selling this stuff to Russia, and they desperately need it, so I can charge them crazy money. And yeah, Russia are bastards, but if it's going to make me a couple of $100,000, then that's more important than the moral predicament that it presents itself in Ukraine. Humans are greedy, right? So. And not everyone has a very robust moral compass that would be able to overcome the gleam of gold, right? So here, this is nothing about Finland per se. I mean, you could argue about tighter regulation, of course, and I think that's where this will go. But these are Finnish people. This isn't Finland. So two Finnish companies exported over 3 million euros worth of sanctioned military goods that ended up in Russia. The products included electronics, drones, and more. And what you need to do is just have very robust ramifications for doing this, and tighten up those laws as much as possible. 100 foreign components were found in the Russian Kinzhal missile. So this is a Dagger missile, the hypersonic missile that they sent some waves of to the Starokonstantinov air base the other day. Of those, so of the 100 foreign components, 77 were American, 8 were Swiss, 5 were Taiwanese, 6 were Japanese, 3 German, and 1 Spanish. I mean, you know, there's another issue that needs to be tightened up. But the problem is, you know, these American companies are almost certainly not selling them on purpose to Russia, or with knowledge that they're ending up in Russia. There might be nothing that these companies can do. It's not quite like this. It looks like these Finnish people were selling directly to Russia, going, yeah, we're breaking the law and doing that, and there you go. This could well be selling a component to this third party within the US, who sells it to that party within the US, who sells it to that third party within Kazakhstan, who sends it for that, who sells it to Russia, or so on and so forth. Maybe even more strangled than that. So this is really challenging and very difficult to stop. Ukraine, so now we're going to just 2 more bits on recruitment. Ukraine, on the one hand, there is this article in the New York Times titled "People Snatchers: Ukraine's recruiters use harsh tactics to recruit." So, Ukraine, quote, "Army recruiters are becoming increasingly aggressive in their efforts to replenish the ranks. In some cases, pulling men off the streets and whisking them to recruiting centres." Now, we had heard about this previously throughout the war. There were videos that were released, sometimes claimed as being sort of Russian disinformation. And it all kind of quietened down, and actually, you know, they had plenty of volunteers, but that time I think has gone, where the volunteers have been exhausted. Now you're getting to the point where they're going to have to force people to mobilize. It's how they do that and retain, you know, morale without scaring people off to run away to outside of Ukraine. So it's a really delicate situation. We'll be watching very closely this, because I have said plenty of times over the last few weeks that the biggest challenge for Ukraine going forward is boots on the ground. This is the biggest challenge. On the other hand, we have here Anton Gerashchenko saying a citizen of Nepal taken prisoner. So I've reported on Nepalese being rounded up or sort of not bribed, but incentivized to go and fight in Ukraine for Russia. A citizen in Nepal taken as prisoner of war by the Ukrainian defenders in Zaporizhia says he was recruited after receiving a Russian student visa in Nepal. According to him, recruiters tell citizens in Nepal that the war will be over soon and it will be a chance for them to earn money and receive a Russian passport. Reuters also reported that Nepali police have arrested 10 people who reportedly sent young people of the country into illegal recruitment into the Russian army after taking large amounts of money from them for travel visas. Early in December, Nepal asked Moscow not to recruit its citizens into the Russian army and to send any Nepali soldier in its armed forces back to Nepal after 6 of its citizens serving in Russia's military were killed. Okay, so that is an ongoing issue, but it shows as well, possibly or arguably shows that the Russians are themselves desperate for boots on the ground as well. Okay, moving on to geopolitical stuff. This is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, this is great news. So with the news that accession talks were kind of ratified by the European Council for Ukraine and Moldova to join the EU. It wasn't just those two, and I think Austria had been arguing that there wasn't this unfair advantage, and Georgia were kind of included. So great scenes from Georgia, brave of the EU to do this, and the correct thing to do. The pro-Russian regime, so that's Georgia Dream, who are ruling in Georgia, are very different from maybe the sentiments on the ground. The pro-Russian regime will be chucked out of office in the near future, Tim White predicts. But here we have thousands of Georgians gathered at Tbilisi's Freedom Square to celebrate the European Council's decision to grant their country European Union candidate status. Fantastic. You know, this is a really big thing. Yes. And if you're talking about Russia's geopolitical aims in the whole kind of Eurasian region, but just in the world, this is super important. Like Georgia is very much in the sphere of influence of Russia, and if they move towards being, and they've got annexed regions there, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, if they join the EU or cozy up towards the EU, that is a kick in the teeth for Putin. Now, the UK has sanctioned Russia's Novicom Bank. The UK extended its sanctions list to include Russia's Novicom Bank, a bank owned by the Russian state conglomerate Rostec. The UK government announced on the 15th of December. I don't know why it's taken that long to sanction. I would have thought it would be pretty obvious to do something like that, but what do I know? Finland will provide the US with 15 areas of the country for military depots and bases. So this is another example of how the decision by Putin to invade Ukraine was one of the most stupid decisions in the world, because he shot himself in the foot multiple times. He set out these goals about, one of the rationale was that Ukraine, was getting too close to NATO. NATO was encroaching upon Russia. So they invaded Ukraine. And what happened? Ukraine even more wants to join NATO, and then Finland and Sweden. And Finland have already got NATO. They're already part of NATO, with Sweden hopefully going to be there at some point soon. And Finland, that borders Russia, has now allowed the US access to 15 areas of the country for military depots and bases. So Russia has now got American military bases on its borders. Duh. The Finnish Foreign Ministry has announced its intention to sign a defence cooperation agreement with the US, which will allow the US military to place its bases, warehouse weapons and contingents in 15 military areas of the country. These include naval and air bases, garrisons and training grounds, among others. The agreement will be signed on the 18th in Washington. Finnish Defence Minister Antti Hakanen stressed that the agreement does not envisage the deployment of US bases and military contingents in eastern Finland on the border with Russia. So it's not on the border with Russia. However, it's on the border. I mean, Finland is on the border with Russia, and you've got 15 bases in Finland where the US will have presence. So Russia's border is now kind of NATO heavy, including US. So yeah, incredible. Finland has again closed its borders with Russia. 2 checkpoints stopped working on the evening of the 15th. Day after reopening. The reason is a renewed influx of refugees, which the Finnish Ministry of Internal Affairs has associated with foreign countries' influence. In other words, they are blaming the Russians for those migrants trying to get across that border, or those border points. And talking about borders, the Slovak truckers end their protest at the border crossing with Ukraine. So Ukraine's border guard said the movement of trucks at the border with Slovakia is gradually resuming for an indefinite period. On the other hand, the blockade of the Polish-Ukrainian border will start again on Sunday night to Monday night, so that's tomorrow night. This is reported by RMF24 with reference to protesting carriers. And indeed, there are, as of Saturday, as of today, 2,400 trucks are waiting to enter Ukraine from Poland. So there's still that massive backlog that is in place. Right. Now I'm going to go, and I know I've probably peed off an awful lot of people for last week, but it's really difficult. It's really difficult to report on politics, geopolitics, when one country is so important. The US is so important, and the US is so deeply divided along partisan lines, and those divisions translate into an effect on the battlefield in Ukraine, right? So I have to report on this. I'm not trying to shout about my political preferences to everyone, right? But what's really interesting, I'm going to refer you to a very conservative person. So this is a chap called David French. David French ran for US president in 2014, if I remember. I know David French. I have debated him on radio. So if you want to see me debate David French for, I don't know, just over an hour on cancel culture, and I was arguing from the left, and he was arguing from the right that cancel culture is a leftist thing, and I was arguing, no, it ain't, it's a rightist thing. Here's all the evidence for it being a rightist thing, and he was there. And actually, he's a lovely guy. So he's an evangelical Christian, but he's someone who reaches across the aisle. He's a really good guy, David French, although I disagree with his politics hugely. He is a lovely guy. And he's written an article as a right-wing kind of Republican about republicanism and the support to support Ukraine persuade the elephant. He talks about John and Haidt's psychology. I don't want to go into it, but I just, in any great detail, I just want to read you these paragraphs because this worries the heck out of me, and I think it's getting worse. And I'll be interested to see what you guys think. I'll be interested to see what I know what Democrats, my viewers, will think. I'll be interested to see what Republican viewers think. Whether you agree with this, I know some of you just absolutely hate Biden. You think he's treasonous and should be, impeached, etc., etc. And I guess I can probably predict your responses. But let me know what you think. So this is what David French, a Republican, says. What does this have to do with aid to Ukraine? President Zelensky was in the US this week to make a pitch for American aid. Republican support for Ukraine is in decline. So this is a fact. He's linked that to evidence. And party leaders are so far refusing to vote for aid unless the Democrats agree to Republican demands on border security. While I support a reasonable compromise that funds Ukraine and provides additional border security, there is increasing evidence that many Republicans are simply turning against Ukraine. This is what I want your opinion on, right? Because I think this is happening and I'm deeply worried about it. And I talked about it the other day because I think the identity of Ukraine is being merged with the identity of Biden. And so therefore people who hate Biden just by extension hate Ukraine, and that gets in the way of doing the right political thing in the world and for the US, and this is, I think, exceedingly dangerous. Anyway, he goes on to say there is increasing evidence that many Republicans are simply turning against Ukraine in both mind and heart. In some GOP circles, there is now outright contempt for the Ukrainian cause. So this is aligning itself with Russian disinformation, these Russian narratives. So he continues, on Monday, Senator J.D. Vance, now I'm no fan of J.D. Vance at all, and I think this is just true to form, but J.D. Vance told reporters, quote, the idea of flying this guy, so Zelensky, at the last minute and effectively to badger and guilt trip us, I just find grotesque. J.D. Vance, put yourself in Zelensky's shoes, would you, just for a second? I wonder what you would have done, J.D. Vance, when your country was attacked on the night it was attacked. Would you have got a taxi and got out of there? Or would you be fighting tooth and nail for your country to prevail? Later that same day, he said on a podcast hosted by the former Donald Trump chief strategist Steve Bannon, quote, there are people who would cut Social Security, throw our grandparents into poverty. Why? So that one of Zelensky's ministers can buy a bigger yacht. That is actual Russian disinformation. And is not true. No one's going to cut Social Security and throw your grandparents into poverty to help Ukraine. That's not what's going to happen. So this is a straw man. This is a false reality that you're building up so you can burn it down. Last year, says French, I wrote an entire piece trying to explain the new right's hatred for Zelensky. Donald Trump Jr. called him an international welfare queen. Turning Point USA's president, so that's a right-wing organization, Charlie Kirk, said Zelensky was, quote, totally corrupt. While Kirk's colleague, Benny Johnson, said the Ukrainian president was an, quote, ungrateful piece of expletive. Tucker Carlson said he dressed like the manager of a strip club. These are prominent voices within the Republican sphere that are saying truly horrific things in my book. These are just, it's not cool. They're basically mouthpieces for the Kremlin. This is so worrying. Those aren't geopolitical arguments. Each of these right-wing leaders is speaking to the right-wing elephant using the language of derision and disdain. So what he's saying is this is a problem of the heart. This is an emotional reaction. What is going on here? They're telling the in-group, so people like them, they're telling their own, this is how we feel about Ukraine. I don't mean to suggest there are no logical or rational arguments against Ukraine aid, but opposition is now becoming a matter of identity on the right. This is what I've been saying. Thank you so much for, I think it was David that sent me this article, because he said, I think you'd like this. Part of the package of beliefs and values that determines what it means to be Republican. This is all about identity. It really, really is. So I'm just making sure that is, oh no, it might not have been. It's, anyway, doesn't matter. I think it was David. But it's not enough to decry contempt as a tactic, especially when that contempt seems to be working. Republicans are now 32 points more likely than Democrats to say that our nation is providing too much aid to Ukraine. Actually, it's not Evan. So that Evan, sorry. Thank you, Evan. Really appreciate you sending me this article. Now, I could go on and on, but that snapshot of viewpoints is, I think, really troubling. So if we've got this move in the US where it is becoming a partisan issue, now how do we solve that? Like, how do you convince those people that this is not true, that Zelensky isn't totally corrupt, that he's not an international welfare cream, that he's not an ungrateful piece of, and that he's not dressed like, well, whatever, you can just slag off the way he's dressed, but, you know, he's in war, so... And that is not aiding Ukraine. It doesn't allow the ministers to buy bigger yachts. Like, these are all lies. So how do we deal with that? Because I see this as a massive challenge. There you go. And if you're bored, you can check out my debate over cancel culture with David French. I can say I've debated a presidential nominee, or candidate, or whichever one. Anyway, US intelligence agencies. Now, to add to that, this. And there's nothing else that invalidates this man from running. This should. US intelligence agencies have been searching for a folder with intelligence on Russia's interference in the US presidential election for more than 2 years. So it disappeared from the White House during Donald Trump's presidency. According to the sources, the folder is so explosive that it could only be viewed with the highest security clearance. Now, the Daily Telegraph, so this isn't some kind of left-wing organization, reports on this. So top secret US intelligence file on Putin disappeared during Trump's presidency. Is believed to contain intelligence gathered by the US and NATO allies and details the work of Russian agents during the 2016 election. A separate report by Robert Mueller, who was appointed to investigate Russian interference in 2016, found that Putin's agents attempted to sway the election results, quote, in a sweeping and systematic fashion. The binder is believed to have been held at the CIA, with intelligence officials requiring top-level clearance to handle it within the agency's headquarters in Langley, Virginia. But it later went missing during a frantic attempt to declassify reports relating to Russian interference by Mr. Trump and his aides as he prepared to leave office in January 2021. Multiple sources told CNN. One aide to Mark Meadows, so Mark Meadows was his chief of staff. Now, the aide has testified in Congress that she is almost, quote, almost positive it went home with him, with Mark Meadows. So Mark Meadows, it appears, took that folder home. Now, he has denied that allegation, but it's disappeared. Someone's taken it home. Someone's got rid of it. The binder has not been found in Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, where other classified documents were discovered, despite aides' attempts to track it down, according to the report. This is massively, this should be scandal central. Like, the fact that this isn't the biggest, this is interference in the democratic institutions and mechanisms of what is supposed to be the beacon of democracy, and that the leadership upon whose watch that happened, or at least as a result of that happening, or after that happened, have disappeared that evidence. This is hugely controversial. Yeah, everyone should be talking about this. I mean, I think this is staggering. Anyway, let me know what you think. I'm sure people on the right, I'm sure Republicans will be, yeah, shut up, Biden needs to be impeached. Okay, sure. Yeah, I don't know. I find this all pretty troubling, to be honest, and it's kind of does get to me. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please, I don't want to wedge between. I want this to be a broad church, and I don't want to keep talking about Democrats, Republicans. But it's really hard not to when this happens. I can't not report this stuff. I can't ignore that people are saying these things. And I know people will entrench in their positions and say, well, Democrats this, and kind of, what about this? No, but okay, that's another thing. Let's understand this. You know, what do we think about JD Vance? What do we think about Turning Point USA saying these things? Is this right? Is this creating huge amounts of damage to what is good and proper, which is the defense of Ukraine and the defense of democracy in the Western world? Let me know what you think. Take care. Speak soon.